Welcome to Poetry Corner. I am Bruce Janu, reading for you some of my favorite poems and stories from the master, Edgar Allan Poe. This show is also becoming a podcast and is currently available on Anchor, Spotify, Pocket Casts, and will soon be available on Apple Podcasts and Google Podcasts as well. So stay tuned for that. On the last episode, we talked a bit about Poe's wife, Virginia, and the motif that Poe often visited in his poems and stories. And that motif is a person dealing with the death of a beautiful young woman. You could find this in The Raven and in some other poems and stories as well. On this episode, I'll be reading one of my favorite poems that fall into this category. It is called Annabel Lee, and it is undoubtedly inspired by the death of Poe's wife, Virginia. Virginia contracted consumption in 1842. Now, consumption was tuberculosis. That's what they called it back then, and there was no cure, no vaccine. It was a respiratory infection. People spit up blood. They kind of withered away. That's why it was called consumption. She became increasingly worse, and this brought Poe into a deep depression. And ironically, it was at this time that some of his best work was also completed. She died at 1847. And before she died, she told her husband that when she died, she would become his guardian angel. Annabel Lee was the last poem that Poe wrote before his death just 2 years later in 1849. In fact, this poem wasn't published until after Poe had died. And it is the quintessential romantic poem. Not romantic like we talked about last week in the Valentine's Day sense, but romantic in the Romantic era sense. This poem is deeply emotional, it's somewhat morbid, and was very characteristic of the poetry of the era. Annabel Lee by Edgar Allan Poe. It was many and many a year ago in a kingdom by the sea that a maiden there lived whom you may know by the name of Annabel Lee. And this maiden, she lived with no other thought than to love and be loved by me. I was a child and she was a child in this kingdom by the sea, but we loved with a love that was more than love, I and my Annabel Lee. With a love that the winged seraphs of heaven coveted her and me. And this was the reason that long ago in this kingdom by the sea, a wind blew out of a cloud, chilling my beautiful Annabel Lee, so that her high-born kinsman came and bore her away from me to shut her up in a sepulcher in this kingdom by the sea. The angels, not half so happy in heaven, went on envying her and me. Yes, that was the reason, as all men know in this kingdom by the sea, that the wind came out of the cloud by night, chilling and killing my Annabel Lee. But our love, it was stronger by far than the love of those who were older than we. of many far wiser than we, and neither the angels in heaven above nor the demons down under the sea can ever dissever my soul from the soul of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And the moon never beams without bringing me dreams of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And the stars never rise, but I feel the bright eyes of the beautiful Annabel Lee. And so, all the night tide, I lie down by the side of my darling, my life and my bride, in her sepulcher there by the sea, in her tomb by the sounding sea. Annabel Lee by Edgar Allan Poe. Virginia married Edgar Allan Poe when she was 13 years old. I know, a little creepy. He was 27. She was also his first cousin. Now, marrying first cousins was not unusual at the time, but her age was. In fact, her family didn't want them to get married. They wanted her to wait, but she didn't want to, and so they got married. Their marriage certificate lists her age at 21, which wasn't the case. She was only 24 when she died in 1847. They had been married for 11 years. Much has been speculated about their relationship that I won't get into here too much, but they were devoted to one another. When Virginia got ill, they moved several times, trying to find an environment that was good, that was better for her. She just wanted him to be happy. She said this to a friend at the time, quote, "I know I shall die soon. I know I can't get well, but I want to be as happy as possible and make Edgar happy." She often sat by her husband's side when he wrote poetry, and she actually dabbled in poetry herself. A year before her death, she wrote a Valentine's poem to her husband, which she gave to him, and it's a sweet, traditional love poem, and I'm going to read it to you. These are Virginia's words that she scrawled out on a piece of paper to her husband. "Ever with thee I wish to roam. Dearest, my life is thine. Give me a cottage for my home and a rich old cypress vine removed from the world with its sin and care and the tattling of many tongues. Love alone shall guide us when we are there, shall heal my weakened lungs. And oh, the tranquil hours we'll spend, never wishing that others may see. Perfect ease we'll enjoy without thinking to lend ourselves to the world and its glee. Ever peaceful and blissful we'll be." After she died, Poe spiraled, and then he died 2 years later. On the next episode of Poetry Corner, we'll be visiting a theme often found in romantic art, something that we could all relate to at the moment: solitude and being alone. That's next time. I am Bruce Janu. Thanks for listening.